Welcome to Artificiality, where minds meet machines. We founded Artificiality to help people make sense of artificial intelligence. Every week, we publish essays, podcasts, and research to help you be smarter about AI. Please check out all of Artificiality at www.artificiality.world. Few understand how to anticipate major technology shifts in the enterprise better than today's guest, Ed Sim. Ed is a pioneer in the world of venture capital, specifically focusing on enterprise software and infrastructure since 1996. He founded BoldStart in 2010 to invest at the earliest stages of enterprise software companies, growing the firm from $1 million to around $375 million today. So where does an experienced investor who has seen countless tech waves come and go place his bets in this new AI-first future? That's the key topic we dive into today. While AI forms a core part of our dialogue, Ed emphasizes that he doesn't look at pitches and go, "Oh, AI, I need to invest in that." Rather, he tries to see if founders have identified a real pain point, have a unique approach to solving it, and can clearly articulate how they will provide a significant improvement over status quo. AI is an important component, of course, but it isn't a reason to invest alone. With that framing in mind, Ed shares where he's most excited to invest in light of recent generative AI breakthroughs. Unsurprisingly, AI security ranks high on his list given enterprises' skittishness around adopting any technology that could compromise sensitive data or infrastructure. Ed saw this need early, backing a startup called Protect AI in March 2022 that focuses specifically on monitoring and certifying the security of AI systems. The implications of AI have branched into virtually every sector, but Ed reminds us that as investors and builders, we must stay grounded in solving real problems versus just chasing the shiny new thing. Ed, thanks so much for joining us. We're excited to talk to you today. Why don't you start off by telling us about BoldStart and what inspired you to start the firm?
Yeah, so I've been in the VC industry or as an early stage enterprise investor since 1996. And Dave, you and I caught up many years ago. I think you mentioned in the late 90s. So glad to see that we're still kicking around in the tech space. I specifically started BoldStart in 2010 because at the time we had just exited a company in the open source data warehousing space called Greenplum, sold that to EMC. It eventually became Pivotal Software as a public company. And a lot of these founders that we had exited prior to that kept coming back and saying, Ed, I don't need $5 million or $8 million to figure out if an enterprise business can get started. The rise of open source, and there's this thing called Amazon S3 and this thing called Elastic Compute. And I think I only need $500K to $1 million, but there's no one who will write me that small check. And I had a bunch of founders come back to me who were successful and said, can you help me find that $1 million? And I kept saying, oh my God, this could be a light bulb opportunity. This is an opportunity to kind of try things back in the day. And it was called Nail It, Then Scale It. So can we create a fund that would be the first investor of record, adding tons of value the way that VCs always said they would, but write much smaller checks. So that was the genesis of BoldStart. It was a $1 million fund to start with. And now we're 14 years later, believe it or not, and we're sitting almost on a $200 million main fund and then $175 million opportunity fund to continue backing our winners over time.
Extraordinary growth and change. Let's dig into this generative AI space. So you've seen multiple, technology shifts, right? And this one stands out, I think, in terms of the speed with which the technology is changing, right? The fundamental underlying capabilities of these, large foundation models, plus the speed with which the world is experiencing it, because we've got experimental tools like ChatGPT being used by 100 million users. How do you get conviction at your earliest stage, which I know you call it inception stage? How do you get conviction in a market that's moving this fast to say, I'm going to back this team and this strategy for what will likely be a 7-10 year journey?
Yeah, look, generative AI is absolutely fascinating. But it's a technology. I remember back in 1996, I spoke at the Java Internet Expo in a panel talking about investing in Java. I'm like, Java is a software. It's a coding language. You still have to find, in my opinion, fundamental founders who are solving fundamental problems, who are doing it uniquely with technology that is going to be 10 times or 100 times better for an end user? How is that going to make the end user's life that much better? Where eventually, if they have that software and you take it away from them, they would say, oh my gosh, you can't take it away from me. Like, I must have this thing and I will pay for it. I'll even pay for it myself. So if you look at the history over the last 28 years and mobile, the internet, these are all just underlying fundamental technologies. So in my opinion, I don't really think about the generative AI piece. In fact, I almost cringe when founders come at me and say, hey, I'm creating an AI developer platform. What the hell does that mean? I would rather talk to a founder that says, I am building out, let's just say, a new way for developers to rapidly increase their productivity because I'm going to find all the security vulnerabilities using AI. And then not only am I going to find those, but I'm also going to use AI to fix those because I'm sitting on the largest data platform around that. So AI is not the core pitch. It's the problem. It's the user and everything else. So if you buy into that thesis and then look at the background of the founder, because typically inception for us means we're talking to people while they're at their companies and thinking about their ideas on the weekends or have already left but have not raised funding or even coded anything. The idea is do they have a history of building products? We only back technical founders, engineers who, typically will sit there and say, gee, here's a problem. Is there a solution to this? Has anyone automated this? If not, I'm going to figure out a way to automate this. So those are the types of founders we back, and they typically come from other tech companies or probably sat with the problem for 10 to 15 years. So that's kind of how we do it. And then the question we have to ask ourselves is this. Can the founder zoom into the problem? Once again, versus saying, hey, I'm an AI for developers or an AI for security. Can they zoom into the end user problem and understand that workflow and what an end user does every day? But then can they articulate a story that also says that within 3 or 5 or 8 years, if everything goes right, it could be really big, right? So, those are kind of the balances that we look for, and that's how we back founders and get the conviction to do so.
Are there any new problems that are coming up from generative AI that really intrigue you? I mean, we see challenges of how do you manage data? How do you present answers to employees inside the enterprise that access only data that they're allowed to see, not everything that's actually in the enterprise? We see all kinds of challenges around data security and privacy, trust and answers. Like, which of all of this mess of questions and problems are most exciting to you?
For me, it's security. I've been tweeting out there and saying things, but in my opinion, there's no AI in the enterprise without robust AI security. And the reason I say that is because I spent a lot of time with enterprise IT buyers. I had a leading tech executive at one of the largest banks speak at my most recent investor annual meeting. And the most interesting fact that came out of that was that, hey, yes, we're still early in the pilot phase. In fact, with 150 or so applications out there. But when we roll this out, and we've rolled out about a dozen so far, we're only going to roll it out internally first before we do anything externally facing, touching the customer. So you ask, why is that? Well, we're very concerned about security issues. We're also very concerned about hallucination issues. So then when you break down kind of what security issues there could be, and this is another framework that I can share with you about the first question you asked. So I was fortunate enough to start iterating with the founder of Protect AI back in October of 21. And he, prior to that, was at the AWS running kind of the AI ML go-to-market for SageMaker and other products. And he kept talking to the largest customers, which AWS served. And they kept saying, gee, you know what? I may have a dashboard from a chief data officer perspective to understand what models are in production, how they're performing, et cetera, et cetera. But when I go to the security guy and I say, hey, how many models do I have in production? Which ones are externally facing? Which ones are internally facing? How secure are they? Has the data been tampered with? Has the model been tampered with? Who's touching it? They couldn't answer the question. And this founder said to me, he's like, I think we need to solve this problem. And our investment thesis at the time was amazing founder, sold his last company in the MLOps space to Oracle, kind of knows the platform, can build and sell. But let's make sure he has 3 years on runway because we just don't know when there will be a seminal hack that happens in the AI space. Lo and behold, we funded that thing in January, February 2022. ChatGPT came around in November of 2022. We ended up then getting a $40 million round done this past summer. And every enterprise on the planet and vendors trying to reach out to us, trying to figure it out. So the point is like our thesis was, if this works, can this be really big? We just didn't know the timing. But the point is that in the AI space, there's something that they created called the ML bomb. It's the ML bill of materials. And if you hear about S bombs, that's a software bill of material. That's only software. An ML bomb would include data. It would include the model. It would include the software. So how do you look at that whole chain? And they've created a new acronym, MLSecOps, of course. You have to have a new acronym. And so how do you kind of tie that whole chain together? So Ian just actually testified in front of Congress talking about the need for AI security. So anyway, in my opinion, we will not get this at scale without solving that problem, because people are afraid about prompt injections where people can actually manipulate prompts and steal data. They're worried about data leaking to model providers and kind of having sensitive data out there. They're worried about, for example, falsifying data. Like imagine this. Imagine that you've trained your car to see a stop sign and someone poisoned the data separately so it goes 60 miles an hour the next time it sees it. So there's all these crazy things that are out there, and you have to solve that problem if you want to deploy this.
How much do you think the growth of the market is held back by these issues of security? And I guess there's also this sort of question that it feels like when we talk to other people that they're not even sure that they have the full list of security questions they need to ask, right? So you get I know what my data is, and I know what the interface is that I for my application to my employees or to my customers, but then I'm using this model that I got somewhere, and I don't really understand what's in it. And so they're not even sure what questions to be asking about security to know what this thing is spitting out.
Yeah, the question, the answer, in my opinion, is that, look, first of all, it's absolutely amazing what we have access to today. Once upon a time, if you were investing in a company that was writing software and that was leveraging AI, you had to build out your own team. You had to build out your own data infrastructure team, your own machine learning team, your own AI team. That was very expensive 6 or 7 years ago to do that. Now, all you need is an API. All you need is an API key, and you get access to one of the most comprehensive models out there in the world. And now you have all these new tools like open source that are coming around the pike. So I think it's no longer an expertise issue on the engineering side. So now everyone is in the prototyping phase, right? They're in the prototyping phase. And because the markets are moving so fast, people are scared, on the enterprise side and the more conservative kind of groups to release some of these applications out in the wild to externally facing customers because of hallucination issues. I think hallucination is definitely a big deal. And then I would say security would be the second piece. So they're all in testing right now. So I would believe that the back half of this year, I'm talking about Q3 and Q4, will be the time outside of like the Microsoft Copilots and whatnot, which are kind of easy things to do, outside of the very simple text generation where the cost of getting something wrong isn't as high as something where, making a decision on a trade or making a decision on shutting a port or something like that. Those things are out there now, but the high value stuff that's super important, I don't think will happen and roll out until Q3, Q4 when people answer all the other questions.
And on the open source side of things, you've been involved in that a long time, have a perspective of the history. There's obviously a lot of debate right now about open source versus proprietary models, and a lot of it's been framed in two different ways. One is safety and security, and another is who gets to develop these big models, whether that's regulations supporting major companies and concentration of AI. How do you think about this issue? It seems that to me that you'd probably have a little bit more of a subtle view on the current state of the discourse.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the answer is yes to all the above. And when I talk to enterprises, I have a company called Cape Privacy. And they've been around for 6 or 7 years. They started out in the secure multi-computation space, doing machine learning and encrypted data. And fast forward, they have now a full-on platform to allow any enterprise to build an AI app using any model they want. So right now we have 10 models they can select. And then there's a chat interface. So I guess my answer would be that both will win. I don't think there's going to be any one provider, but if you look at a workflow in an enterprise, let's say a 10-step process where someone has to review data, someone has to comment on it, someone has to approve it. Maybe the AI will read some document with some OCR, machine vision, and then someone has to kind of give it a thumbs up or thumbs down. But if you look at it like a 10-step workflow, I believe that I'm already starting to see these enterprises saying, gee, you know what? It's not going to be one model. First of all, I'm not going to use OpenAI for everything because that's not the best thing for me. Two is it probably will cost me a lot of money just to use OpenAI. And I think it's probably one of the best platforms to start prototyping on. But over time, I may not get the scale advantages from a volume perspective. So maybe I also want to deploy some very specific open source models. I think you can see very specific open source domain models that people can train specifically, let's say with a vector database to fine tune it to get, more specific answers. And then you'll have a combination of humans in the workflow, providing a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And I don't think this is any different than AI versions 5 years ago. We had backed companies like Catalytic. We sold to PagerDuty, or Fortress IQ, which was doing business process automation using machine vision. We sold that to Automation Anywhere. I view it's the same thing, except the technology is better. But on these super high value things where enterprises care deeply, you're going to have some humans in the loop doing this, and you're going to have multiple models. So it's all going to win, in my opinion.
How do you think about talking to enterprises about that basic question? Imagine an enterprise that is deeply embedded in in a vendor ecosystem like a Microsoft, right? And they're getting pitched by every, major tech company, and they're sitting there going, yeah, but maybe this is a time for me to be thinking about open source. They're getting pitched at this isn't going to be secure enough. You're not going to be able to rely on it. You've backed companies that have built things around open source or been heavily involved in open source. So how do you think about countering that, big tech message, that you got to go with our stuff versus that, that crazy open source stuff?
Yeah. So I guess a couple of things. This actually begs a broader question. We have not invested in any LLMs per se. Nor do I think we will, period. To be honest with you, I think it's a very capital intensive game. It's hard to figure out who the winners will be. I'm sure there'll be, a few people that make a lot of money, but there'll be many more that lose a lot more. So, I'm a fan more of kind of leveraging kind of what's out there and building around perhaps some of the open source stuff, or building applications or tooling around it. So I'd say that the answer is that many of my companies don't run into that problem because they're either providing services on top, services around, enhancing the ability for developers to build faster or whatnot. So that hasn't really become a question thus far. And then if you talk to, and I think the answer that you're looking for too is depends on the company size, depends on the sophistication, depends on the project, right? If someone's doing a small project, maybe it's better off just using Microsoft or OpenAI because I'm already paying for it. It gets me up to speed very quickly, have all the tooling there. But, over time, perhaps if this thing becomes very expensive, maybe then I start thinking about how do I migrate off. But I don't think anyone's going to start building right now because generative AI is so new, building everything from scratch. They're going to take the easiest route possible to prove if people care, to prove if people will pay for it. And if they do, then they can start looking at the costs, and everything else over time.
So running these things is expensive. I mean, most of the numbers that people throw out are around the cost to train models, but I'm pretty obsessed with trying to understand the cost of inference, and the true scale. And I'm sort of confused a little bit. So I'd love to get your perspective. You got these things that are extraordinarily expensive, and the any application, and I understand this might be more downstream than where your core focus is, but any use case, the more that someone is engaged, the riskier you are that you're actually going to make any money. So we have this concept that we talk about as memory versus margins. So you want these things to have a long amount of memory, but in order to be really useful. But the longer the memory, the less your margins are, or the margins go into negative because you have this complete counter view. How do you think about that if you step back from the industry of where we're going to find a good sweet spot that the economics of delivery align with the value and engagement of the end user?
I think that's a great question. I think that the software industry is going to have to rethink about how to price for AI, right? And generative AI in particular. And I'll give you a good example. Superhuman, one of our portfolio companies, just won Newsweek's kind of most productive, AI application of the year. And what's amazing about that is that it's not really prompts. It's really the first thing they do is do an auto summary of your email, and it's kind of that user interface kind of built into it. So right now, the pricing for us, it's all built in to kind of one monthly fee, right? So that's kind of where we have it now. Then you have companies like an Intercom, for example, which is, I think, pricing per value, pricing per interaction. So what Intercom does is a customer support platform, and they've moved to a world where every time there's an answer that a rep and a customer is happy with, then maybe they charge 20 cents or 25 cents kind of per hit. So I'm seeing, and then there's others like Microsoft, which are charging $20 extra per month to use all the Copilot features. So what you're seeing is the very beginnings of how software companies are thinking about value-based pricing. And then two is as I mentioned before, this stuff isn't cheap. AI isn't cheap. It's going to cost somewhere, whether you're hitting kind of an API and constantly asking OpenAI, which I think over time you don't want to do. Two is I assume there'll be new technologies coming out, where the problem with AI is that you ask it a question, you can ask the same prompt over and over again, and you make it a different answer every single time. But you could see like caching technologies maybe come around where maybe this is more of a static answer. So therefore you don't have to go back to OpenAI every time. So hit the thumbs up, always give me this answer. Maybe these 20% are dynamic. So let's think about, hey, maybe let me hit my own vector database first before I run something out. So I think people, just like the industry always has, will find a way to eventually create very high margins. I'm talking about the 80% type software margins over time. And the inference stuff, by the way, is going to get more powerful as well on even kind of end user devices. Our phones right now, the models are small enough now that you can put models on your iPhone, or even I think yesterday Samsung just kind of announced a new phone where they have a bunch of Google models put on the phone to do things. So as the chips get more powerful, as the models get smaller, you're going to have people that are going to get much more creative over time about how to use different LLMs and stitch them together and create value for people.
Yeah, we're very interested in what happens on the phone and on the computer. We're a Mac-based. I mean, as an ex-Apple guy, like everything is Mac-based here. So the A chips and the M chips and everything accelerating is something we're watching a lot. And you could see how that could be quite powerful because all of your data is already resident on your machine, right? So if you're trying to query,
privacy, security, right, encryption, everything, it's wonderful.
Yeah, and it's
all the hard stuff has been solved there.
Yeah, it's like I'm thinking that everybody's the current narrative is that Apple is intensely behind, but I kind of wonder if in a couple of years we'll look back and go, when they started that A and M chip, concept and the whole privacy thing, they were anticipating this evolution. We also had the last episode.
By the way, I was gonna tell you something. When we invested in Cape Privacy back 6 years ago, when they were the question that the founder Gavin Numa asked was, "What if we lived in a world where everything was default encrypted, but yet you can still operate your devices the same way at the same speed, but have your full privacy?" So, imagine if you were on your iPhone and you called an Uber. And you got the answer, but Uber doesn't even know who you are, where you are, anything, but the car shows up. Everything was encrypted. Everything was done behind the scenes. I do believe we'll get to that world in the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, right? And that would solve a lot of hacking problems, right? If people wanted to track congressmen and where they were or whatnot. So I just think this is going to open up a whole new world. And I think I was a little bit too early on that front. But to your point, I think it's all coming soon. It's going to be very fast.
Well, I think that privacy is interesting because for years it's always been people have to value it. And a lot of discussions about, almost a tut, you should value it, rather than recognizing that what it takes to truly value privacy is to truly value what AI can deliver. So until generative AI really had the first AI that there's this full conscious mass market adoption of a data-driven interaction that's useful to you, that's the point at which you realize, I want all of this, but I don't want anyone to know anything about me because I don't want to give up my stuff to have the inference back that's useful to me. So I think it really took this shift in the last year or so for that consciousness, that collective consciousness to move, that privacy was really about making AI useful because AI is a self technology. It's something that you individually want to use. It's that personalization. And that was a paradox for a long time. And it takes privacy solutions that we haven't even thought of yet to sort of solve that. I'm interested in what you like to know about worker productivity in these AI workflows. How is it changing technical production? How is it changing the way that people work in these sort of workflows that are so embedded in and use AI or touch AI in a way that most people's workflows don't? What makes you interested in that? What makes you curious about how it changes the way that people work?
I think the most fascinating thing for me when I look at founders kind of starting companies and solving problems, one is what can happen today using LLMs that we couldn't do previously with the prior waves of AI. And I can't tell you how many founders I meet that say, oh my God, I took all this disparate data. I took data that might sit in, think about, let me give you an example. Imagine all the data that an employee creates. I'll call that the data exhaust, sitting in an enterprise organization every single day, from their calendar to the clicks on the website that's monitored, from the Slack and Microsoft Team messages, from the emails, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of data exhaust sitting there from what they enter into Salesforce. And if you thought about it, and let's say log data, right? Log data as well. If you thought about it, if you wanted to get insights on some of these things, like a log data, you'd probably take a statistical or heuristics model to start analyzing things and making predictions. If you wanted to look at what's happening in Slack or Teams, you'd probably sit down and get some natural language understanding model. So you'd have a specific model for each one. But imagine if you had this brain that was smart enough to understand all those things, even images and videos. And you stirred that, dropped into a cauldron, into a pot, and said, let's throw this into the LLM. Do you think stitching together insights from all these different sources, from all these different modalities, could perhaps create some things that you never thought of before? And that's kind of what I've seen with founders in every single category, from customer success to security to everything else. Like, holy crap, I used to create a specific model for each one of these things, and I'd put this all together. And man, some of the insights by taking something that I didn't think was tied to this, oh, wow, this is game changing. And I see lots of that coming around. And that to me is kind of what's exciting about some of this. Second thing I think about is how can you provide expertise to a younger person or a person with like 3 levels experience? And using AI. So that could range from a developer, right? Let's say we have GitHub Copilot. And, the interesting thing about GitHub Copilot is that I think there are two types of people that benefit immensely from that. It would be the junior programmer, or the person that doesn't know how to program or create code. And then it'd be the expert programmer, because the expert programmer knows whether it's good code or bad code. But the person in the middle, I don't think it benefits, because they can write the code themselves, but at the same time, they're not good enough to understand if the code that they write is really good or not. So that's where, for example, perhaps you could create the idea of an expert pair programmer sitting next to someone and just saying, hey, you know what? I think you can tweak this. I think you can make performance better. Or you'd have a security co-pilot like my portfolio company Sneak has, which is worth $7 billion, where they have they bought a deep learning company 4 years ago. They have the largest database now of vulnerabilities found and fixed, and say, hey, you know what? That code that GitHub's writing, that's really not that secure. And here's not only how you change it, but how you fix it. So the whole idea of let's take expertise another layer. Imagine if you're a lawyer and you're a junior M&A lawyer, and there's the guy Ralph in the back corner there that gets charged $2,000 an hour, and you get your first document. Well, Ralph doesn't have time to mention and mark that document up. But what if an AI was trained on all the things that Ralph had written about in the past and looked at things and maybe suggested these are the 10 markups to make, and these are the 5 ones that popped up. So the whole idea of expertise, and then of empowering people to do 2 times, 3 times more, or also having the skills of someone that's 20 years experience, that to me is what gets me excited.
I think this whole area of the future of expertise is just fascinating, because so much of coding and many other professions, including medicine and law and you name it, they're apprenticeship style processes that you have to learn it yourself. You have to develop some muscle memory. You have to watch one, teach one, sort of do one yourself type processes. And how do young people develop expertise when there's now this sort of idea that AI will take the lower skilled early positions, and that gets sort of hollowed out. But the data does say, concur with what you're reflecting, which is the less expert, the more junior get this proficiency boost, if you like. They get better. And then there's this sort of gnarly middle ground where how do you cross this middle ground? I think you said something interesting, which is, can you focus more on having the junior and the senior people almost proximate to each other and a more cadence between them, and there is no middle point. That sort of washes away, and you become expert faster, is what you're sort of really saying. And I think that's a really fascinating idea, that middle part can actually, that's the part that kind of goes away in a counterintuitive way, because AI is amplifying both levels of expertise, taking away the need for the middle ground. Seeing it first in the programming environment, I think, is fascinating, because we can actually study it more effectively and build up some data around actually how this might end up happening.
Let me go back to the security and privacy question on mobile. So what I'm wondering about is, so if we're right that, there's an advantage for an enterprise to develop tools that tap into the compute on the phone, right? Because that is free compute, right? They don't even have to be running it in their own data centers, right? You're going to have an application on your phone that is for your work. And I don't know the data, but anecdotally, it feels like not many people walk around with 2 phones, as we did early in the mobile days, right? You're using your personal phone. You got a VPN connection or a secure, connection to your email, whatever else it is. But if you're really going to try and take advantage of these tools, you're going to need quite a lot of data on your phone to be able for that LLM to run, or whatever generative AI to run. It feels like there's a couple different pathways. It could be a completely software answer. where there's some sort of security protocol that hasn't been developed yet, I guess, that sort of keeps that data secure. Maybe it pings something that's inside the enterprise that's not going up to the public cloud. Like our last interview recently was with Rodrigo Liang from Samba Nova Systems that has a full stack box for generative AI that sits inside the firewall. Or it could be the greatest boost in Apple sales ever because people have to start walking around with two phones again because you get a phone from your company because the phone itself has to be completely secure. And when you leave the business, they have to shut it down. Have you thought at all about like where you think this might go? I understand this is quite speculative and long term.
I think, first of all, I think it's fascinating beyond the phone, thinking about automobiles, thinking about sensors for power. So we are thinking about all this stuff. And then thinking about 5G connectivity too, right? But I think two things, the benefits of doing processing on device would be speed, it would be cost, it would be privacy and security, right? So all three of those kind of would play. I think that a couple of things. One is the models are getting smaller and more powerful. So if there are specific use cases, then they can be on device, and the devices and machines are getting more powerful too on the edge, right? So just think about smaller models doing very specific tasks that are on your phone. Two is if you're worried about privacy and data, I think the world of secure enclaves, we already have a secure enclave in the iPhone itself. Maybe that footprint gets expanded. Maybe they put a different chip in to actually make that secure enclave be bigger so you can actually put more software into it. For example, there are secure enclaves even in the cloud now that didn't exist 5 years ago. You have Azure Confidential Computing now, where you can actually put the model and the data into the secure enclave, and you can attest it's never been touched, and the processing happens there, and you just get an answer, right? So that's happening now. You also have AWS Nitro doing the same thing. And that's been around for 5 years as well, or 4 years. And so I think those things will start taking off in the next few years as people kind of start thinking about those issues. But if you take that same idea, put it on your device, have these secure enclaves, which already exist on the chips, you put smaller models on there, you dump whatever data you have for very specific tasks, or maybe you kind of put things in and pull things out, and boom, you have your answer.
Yeah. So you heard it here first that there's going to be a new chip in the iPhone that's going to be the next great massive upgrade cycle for Apple. So if it dips far enough, buy Apple.
Yeah, for sure.
A broader.
And by the way, what you'll eventually have is Jarvis. You'll have your Iron Man Jarvis on your phone.
Yep.
And it'll be a frightening world where everything you do is recorded and seen and heard. Mm-hmm. And even these fitness devices that I have, the Whoop and my iPhone, the amount of data they have on us is spectacular. Yes. Spectacularly frightening as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Value capture.
Yes. Total. So a broader sort of economic question for you in terms of what you're seeing, hearing, or just sort of speculating. This world of generative AI is primarily driven by subscriptions, right? They are moving in. Some of the tools in the consumer market, especially, are trying to compete with services that are primarily ad supported. But we're seeing, if you're really into this, you've got a subscription to OpenAI and to Anthropic and to XY. There's lots and lots and lots of new services. What do you think about the risk of subscription fatigue or subscription limits in terms of how much people are willing to pay for it? The premise in the enterprise is, in some ways, a broader economic scariness, which is that it saves, against the cost of labor. Right. So we talk about capital capture of large capital from big tech, basically buying the value of saving labor. But where are we, you think, in terms of companies saying, yep, I'm ready to sign up for, an extra $20 for every one of my employees for Copilot versus, well, I don't know if this is really going to be worth it, or I'm not sure I can take that expense on my OpEx.
Yeah, we're living in interesting economic times right now where CFOs are scrutinizing more and more things. And these are just classic business cycles that we go through. So I'd say you have both, right? Some will just say over my dead body, will you be able to do this? And others will be like, okay, let's try it out. Let's roll it out. Let's try it out. Microsoft convinced me. And it's not costing $20 per month, right? And probably costing $3 a month or $4 a month per at the end of the day. And if there are 2 or 3 specific things that someone does every day that's going to be worth $3 to $4 a month, and you can show ROI. So I think right now everyone's willing to test So let's just say, they roll it out for 6 months, but if there's no ROI, then no one's going to use it. I do think, though, that over time you will see some good ROI on these things, and maybe the pricing gets adjusted. And as we all know, it's street pricing. And Microsoft can afford to lose a lot of money for quite a long time to freeze everyone else out until they start making money and have that monopoly machine going. The coolest hack, in my opinion, for if you don't want to pay for things. Look, I pay for GPT because I build some of my own custom, scripts and whatnot on there and applications. But if you download Microsoft Edge and you have Edge browser, which is a Chromium browser, you can still use all your Chrome kind of plugins and whatnot, but they have the Copilot for free. Bing, the Copilot. So basically I can be inside of anything, doing anything I want on my mobile or on my browser and just get access to that thing for free. So I do think over time that, for example, if people see people complaining about Microsoft, people will get some open source models or do something. They'll figure out a way to reduce the cost. I mean, that price won't stay that high forever. And you also have to assume that the costs for compute will continue to go down over the next 5 to 10 years as well. So if you combine all that together, I think this stuff eventually becomes something where we go back to the fundamental question again: what problem are you solving? How are you doing it uniquely? And how are you doing it 10 times better than what I'm doing today? And then I'll pay for it.
So one of the another sort of, I guess you can think of it as security, or think of it as data governance question. Late last year, we interviewed Arvind Jain from Glean, and he talked about their approach to generative AI. And so for those who haven't listened to the interview, go back and listen to it. But basic premise is, if you're going to have an LLM that accesses all of your corporate data, the problem is that no one in the company actually has access to all the corporate data. And so how do you determine what answers to provide to that person? And Glean's strategy is to say, we're going to go look through the data governance channels essentially and say, this is the pool of data that you, Ed, are allowed to look at. So then we're going to generate an answer based on that data. This seems to be a particularly sticky question for pretty much everybody we talk to. It tends to be a little bit farther down the line. Everybody's excited and going and experimenting, and then they go, "Oh, whoops! Right, we still have this problem." How do you think about that? Is there anything there that you see as a different tactic or different solution, or what do you see in this sort of governance angle behind the LLM?
Yeah, I think it's still early days. But I think the same principles apply to a non-LLM based world. So, for example, I was the first investor in Big ID. And Big ID was one of the leading data privacy and data security companies. And it's been around for, since 2015. It's a $1 billion plus company now, and serving many of the largest organizations, banks, airlines, things like that. And so they're using Big ID now, for example, to figure out, because we do label, we provide metadata on every piece of data. And from there, once you have all the metadata and the labeling, and then also tie-ins to the LDAP directory, you can understand kind of who should get access to what. HR should get access to this. Finance should get access to this. IT should get access to this. And there's general buckets. So a lot of that's done just through labeling and stuff. So I think over time, could I see LLMs doing auto labeling? Yeah, it's already starting to do auto labeling of data, who should get access based on certain rules, or just kind of throwing it into the model. But then also you still get back to the question of hallucinations and trust, right? Because if the wrong thing gets sent over the Chinese firewall for investment bank trading versus banking, there could be serious issues. So I think for now, it's still going to be done kind of the old way. And what the founder Glean said is going to be the safest way. There's no reason people should take risk around this, right? Enterprises don't get paid to take risk when they're buying a software solution to solve a problem. So I think his approach is going to pass the security questionnaire, is going to pass the privacy questionnaire, is going to pass all those things. And for now, that's the best way to do it. But people will find a better way over time.
Do you have any conversations or founders coming to you for ideas that are essentially around agentic AI and AI that's able to act or more autonomously, outside of the self-driving cars side of things, but more in sort of online autonomous, competing with search, and how, and if so, how are people thinking about agentic AI and security and privacy?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One is, yeah, people do talk about kind of that agent doing things, but I think right now, I kind of think about it this way. The more important and the higher value a problem is that you're solving, in which a mistake would be mission critical, I'd say that people would have agents doing things for them, and that the end user wants to make sure that they are the ones to approve whether that is the right action to take or not. So I would say that perhaps maybe like in security, there could be 10,000 alerts that pop up. And I don't know if I was a security practitioner, a network ops guy, a SOC guy or woman, to have these 5 alerts pop up that my agent found by looking at lots of different data to automatically take action for me. Right. So I would actually want to make sure, though, that perhaps it told me why it was suggesting something was happening, and then click the button and say yes. So on lower level stuff, maybe it's consumers, for example. Maybe we have an agent out there to say, constantly search, these 10 sites or the whole internet for me to find the best travel prices on this at this time and this date. Then if you do that, fine, book the hotel room for me. I don't even want to hear about it. It has to be a 5-star hotel, has to be within 2 miles of this place. Then I think there could be some people that say, great, just go automatically do it for me. And others may just say, let me approve these things. So I just think, once again, it comes down to cost, value, and the cost of error, and what is the ability to undo something. But I am seeing, the whole idea of agents. And this goes back to the idea of workflows that I mentioned earlier. Maybe in a 10-step workflow, 3 of them are automated. And then maybe there's a human in the loop to constantly say thumbs up or thumbs down. And then maybe after 100 times, where someone gives a thumbs up, you trust it enough to maybe automate 4 steps of the 10-step process. So this is going to be an ever-evolving thing, in my opinion, which means it's going to be a great opportunity to invest in these things because it's not all finished yet. And there's always going to be kind of gray areas. It almost reminds me of the world of where we went from, in the security space, we went from intrusion detection systems, IDS, to intrusion prevention systems. And the difference between IDS and IPS was that IDS detects and IPS prevents. And, the classic argument about IPS was that I still don't want that yet, even though, because I don't trust it. I don't want it to shut down a port when I'm making a $1 billion trade or whatever that is, right? So I still think that's kind of the same thing that's happening today, and it's still early days, and it'll get better and better and better, where out of the box, 7 of the 10 steps will be automated in 2 years. I have no doubt.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a great conversation, and it's been a lot of fun.
One final question. I don't normally ask this question, but I'm really curious. What are you reading? What books have you been reading recently?
Oh, wow. Okay. You know what's funny? I was an economics major when I was in undergrad. I basically, I liked it, didn't love it. And then I find myself reading a lot more books lately. So I just read the kind of the biography of Milton Friedman, not because I believe in everything he does, but I just found it as a fascinating tie into history, where we moved from Keynesianism to monetarism and kind of all the history around that. So I found that absolutely fascinating. And now I'm reading, what that led me into is Ben Bernanke's book on 21st century monetary policy. So I'm about a third of the way through that. Let's see, I read Wellness, I believe, was a book that was just kind of a fun, random book that it was almost nostalgic for people our age, talking about almost commenting on civilization. So yeah, I try to always, it's funny, I always try to have one fiction and one nonfiction at the same time, depending on what my brain is thinking.
Really,
I have this 3-body problem I have a 3-body problem out there too, because I think it's going to be a Netflix show coming out in March. And then my wife and I have our own mini book club. We finished All the Light You Cannot See or whatever, because I saw the show on Netflix. I didn't want to watch it because I heard everyone panning it, but everyone said you have to read the book. So we read the book, and it was an amazing book.
Amazing
awesome
book. Yeah, it's a wonderful book.
That's great. That's a good list. I like that.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I think, by the way, for any of the listeners that are interested, this morning I was reading the Howard Marks essay called Easy Money. And he's probably one of the best essay writers about, investing, and always ties in historical references to it. And he talks about ZERP He talks about kind of how everyone, he talked about kind of investing and that we all went up to the right in the sense that it was like the equivalent of walking on a moving walkway in an airport. You're just going to do better because of the interest rates were lower. And then he talks about kind of where he thinks the world will move in the future, because that ties into a lot of things we do, whether it's IT spending or investing in startups or, wherever it might be.
I love Marx's essays. They're fantastic.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And also you should read Artificiality as well, because you have a lot of great interviews on that. So.
Yeah. And subscribe. It's not very expensive.
No, it's not. Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Yeah, appreciate it. That was fun.
Solid state.